we are just east of Burkittsville, Maryland, on the property of the Schaefer Farm. Now, this farm was the headquarters of the Union's 6th Corps under William Franklin on September 14, 1862. Franklin is going to make this his headquarters around noon on that day, and over the next several hours, the 13,000 men of the 6th Corps are going to be filtering into the area. Now, behind me, you can see that impressive green wall that is South Mountain, and that dip off in the distance is Crampton's Gap. William Franklin is under orders to force Crampton's Gap and move towards Roarsville in an attempt to relieve the pressure, or relieve the siege, I should say, of Harper's Ferry. Now, when Franklin gets here, he believes he's going to have quite a fight on his hands. However, what he does not realize is there's only about 1,000 Confederates guarding Crampton's Gap and the 1.5 miles down to Brownsville Gap. Confederate forces had believed that the Federal attempt to pass through South Mountain would actually run on Brownsville Gap, which would get them much closer to Harper's Ferry. However, the roads are better through Crampton's, and so they're going to attempt to force the gap here. Now, General Franklin and his staff are actually going to have lunch here and allow the rest of the 6th Corps, as it's filtering into the area, to also bed down, take a break after a long day's march. But that's also going to burn up time, and it's going to be several hours before we're going to begin to see these forces move towards Crampton's Gap. In fact, it wouldn't be until 2 p.m. that we begin to see Federal forces stirring. By 4, however, they have pushed beyond Burkittsville and deployed to the north of the town. Specifically, the 1st Division is now lined up in the fields beyond Burkittsville and are directly facing Crampton's Gap.
So we're here just in front of Crampton's Gap. We are on the east side of it. We are set up in a place where you would not expect the Confederate defenders to be. You would expect them to be inside of the gap proper, but it's actually right here on the east side that they're going to be set up in a defensive line here. They are going to encounter the 1st Division of the 6th Corps of the Federal Army. Things are going to begin moving incredibly quickly at this point, Matt. Take us through the action here.
Absolutely, Pat. Now, the reason the Confederates have chosen in front of Crampton's Gap as opposed to up in it is in large part due to the road that is just behind you. The Mountain Church Road actually has a series of stone fences along one side, and the Confederates are going to use those stone fences to their advantage, much like we've seen them use the fences on other parts of South Mountain. Sweeping across the fields directly behind us here would be the 1st Division 6th Union Corps. 3 infantry brigades, Torbert, Bartlett, and Newton, are going to be pushing across these fields, and the initial Federal attack is actually going to be stymied down here by this stone wall, by this Confederate defense. The problem is there's just not enough Confederate troops. With their defenders concentrated at the Brownsville Gap, we don't have a lot of infantry here. We've got just a couple of different Confederate infantry regiments and only a couple cavalry regiments as well. These are understrength forces, and they are going to be driven off of this area quite quickly as the Federal troops begin to wrap around their flanks and begin to pushing them back up the mountain towards Crampton's Gap.
Remember the scene here, guys. When we had Special Orders number 191, it divided the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia. So we're not talking about the A and B at full strength at this point. Jackson has a little bit more than 50% of the entire army trying to take over, that's a weird way of describing it, trying to invest Harper's Ferry. So Lee is here with, let's say, about 18 to 20,000 or so guys. And things are, and saying things are, well, he's got 25,000 at Harper's Ferry, but things are thinning out here. So there's just not enough, to go around as far as the defense, and the Federal Army is showing up en masse, and they're just going to begin overwhelming these Confederates. So I think it's important to point out that, we're not playing with the full deck of cards as far as the Army here for the Confederates.
Absolutely right. Parham's division and also those of Raphael Semmes are going to be quickly overwhelmed and start to be driven back up the mountain. We are going to see some Confederate reinforcements arrive, but they're going to be arriving right up in Crampton's Gap as the situation is collapsing. With the Confederate position on the Mountain Church Road being unhinged, they're going to begin to fall back up the Arnoldstown Road over here and right behind me through Witt's Ravine. Federal forces from the 1st Division 6th Corps will pursue and would be in hot pursuit moving up the ravine into Crampton's Gap. Now, additional Federal forces, the 2nd Division elements of that will be coming up the Gapland Road, converging on the gap right where we are today. There will be some Confederate reinforcements that arrive here, specifically elements from Brigadier General Semmes' brigade. Howell Cobb's small brigade of infantry will begin to arrive here just as the Confederate forces are collapsing through the gap. He is going to have not only a couple regiments with him, including his old command, the Cobb's Legion, but also a pair of guns from the Troop Light Artillery. Those guns are going to begin firing down each of these roads, trying to slow down this Federal advance. However, with the advance of Federal troops, they're going to begin to envelop this position as the Federal infantry is not only moving up the roads themselves, but also moving up into the heavily wooded crown of Crampton's Gap, outflanking these Confederate troops. The Cobb's Legion is going to be surrounded just down the way here and barely gets out with any of its forces. And one of these guns from the Troop Light Artillery will be captured up here just beyond Crampton's Gap. There would be one last area of Confederate defense, if you will, just beyond what is today a picnic pavilion, guarding what's known as the Plaget's Field. One final stone fence line for the Confederates to use before they are forced down the western side of Crampton's Gap. Once this occurs, Federal forces have taken the gap. They will continue to pursue down into the Pleasant Valley, but this fight will be over by 7 p.m.